audience with such an excellent lunch. There were some challenging types of food there, and at least Peter tried them all. I was a little bit hesitant, but we did our best. Good. This morning I was trying to speak as slow as possible, but nevertheless I didn't manage that. The translator urged me to speak a bit slower, which I will try to do, which will mean that I will run even more out of time. Nevertheless, I shortened my presentation, so maybe I might manage to be at the end of my presentation nicely on time. I was stuck at the epidemiology part, and now luckily Daniele already included some epidemiology in his presentation at the end of the morning, so I can be a bit briefer here. I want to show you some additional studies that he did not mention that I still like very much, and I also want you to see that and to be amazed about comparisons between the two studies. The fact is that if you look into the literature for the Bruxism prevalence, the variability is enormous. This is not possible. 6 to 91%. What do you tell your patient? It's really not possible. So we have to focus. How come that we have this enormous variability? Well, maybe because we use different diagnostic methods in the studies. And like on the dots here, there should be polysomnography. But most of the time people use questionnaires or oral history or sometimes clinical examination. Also the study characteristics, they differ between studies. Many, especially Brazilian studies, focus on children because I think they love children, right? As you said yesterday. Adults, general populations, also patient populations, they all determine the outcome of your epidemiological assessment, and they will yield different numbers. Also, if the population is like those supernormals that we discussed this morning, if it's supernormals, you will find different outcomes than if you study more, let's say, representative patient populations in which pathologies are included. And also Bruxism types is also an issue. In many cases, especially in the older studies, the Bruxism was unspecified, meaning that we did not know, reading the paper, if they were talking about sleep bruxism or awake bruxism. Of course, you need to have this information. Now, most of the data are based on self-report and most of them on sleep bruxism. Large-scale population studies are rare, but I would like to mention two of them to you, because I like them. They are almost a decade apart. Let's start with the GSID study that he did together with Jacques Lobbezoo. He's also working in Montreal as a psychiatrist on movement disorders. They called about 2,000 participants, and this was a representative sample of the Canadian population. It's not only Quebecois, but also people from Vancouver and the entire stretch of the continent. All were adults over 18, and they were called and they were asked questions, amongst others, about their sleep bruxism. So here you see the outcome. The prevalence of sleep bruxism is on the y-axis, and the ages of the people who were interviewed are on the x-axis here. The women are round and the males are square. I don't know why. This is for you to determine. But you see that if you look at the younger part, the prevalence is about, let's say, 10–12%. 13% to be precise. If you go to the older part, so over 65, you see that it drops down to about 3% or even 0%. Maybe then they were all, well, passed away, so to say. And in between, the overall prevalence number is 8%, which is a very nice number. 8%, it matches a little bit with the polysomnographic assessment of 7.4. Although if you look at your questionnaire outcome, that was 12.5, if I remember well. That was slightly higher, but still it's in the range of about 10%. So it's a good number. About 10% is nice. Males and females equal. But now let's move to, this was North America. Now we move to Europe. It's a nice continent. UK, Germany, and, well, I don't know this country too well, but you might. Italy, a very big population. Over 13,000 people were interviewed. Also telephone interviews, all were adults like in the other study. And now what I like a lot is that here exactly the same prevalence was found. So it's another continent, other people calling, other languages, and still they arrive at this 8.2%. 8% in the previous slide, 8.2 here. That is exactly the same. Very strong data. So if you want to inform your patient about self-reported sleep bruxism, how often does this happen, doctor? Am I an exception, yes or no? You can tell them, well, studies have shown about 8%, so let's say about 10% of people have this. So you're not alone. Go outside, you see many of them. And again, here decrease with age and males equal to females. So, in conclusion, bruxism in adults, approximately 8% of the general adult population, men and women alike. It's higher in young adults, and you will see in children it's even higher, and it's lower in the elderly. So this is the study that Daniele already showed to you. It's a systematic review, so I took out many slides during the break, and I will jump to the conclusion, or the results and conclusion. 35 papers were selected, and 7 out of them were selected for the final review. And if you see here the generic bruxism prevalence, which means that it's unspecified whether it's sleep bruxism or awake bruxism, the range is quite large, 8 to 31%. For awake bruxism, it's a bit higher, the range is from 22 to 31. And for sleep bruxism, it is now, you see this? It's nice, 12.8, 12.5 in your study, this is good. And again, all those studies, they indicate the same. It's decreasing when people grow older. So that's the good news. When you turn grey like me, the likelihood that they will brux in a couple of years is going down quite fast. So that's the good news of getting older. And for males and females now, it's the same again, which is also good news. So the prevalence data for bruxism activities in adults are variable, but there is some tendency to be seen if you take a close look. This is more difficult in children. So let me give you an example of a study that we did in Amsterdam on Dutch adolescents. We also have adolescents. It's not only you who suffer from adolescence, it's also us. The aim of this study was that we wanted to assess the prevalence rates of self-reported sleep bruxism and awake bruxism amongst our kids. It was a cross-sectional questionnaire survey. We did quite a big study, I think. It's not the 13,000 of this multinational study that I showed earlier, but still more than 4,000 kids were examined in the age range of secondary school between 12 and 18 years. And just to skip the details, the overall prevalence of sleep bruxism was 14.8%. This is higher than the young adults that I showed on one of those previous slides. So we go really from high numbers, we go gradually lower until almost 0% when people turn 80 and over. And about awake bruxism, that is in this study a little bit lower. In other studies we find higher, but awake bruxism is more difficult to assess, not only by means of equipment, but also by means of questionnaires. It's difficult to have a good understanding of the question, as I discussed already this morning. What is clenching? For associations, we see now that there is a preference for girls, females, young females. And when they turn adults, they match up with the males. So if you look at kids, then girls are more prone to have sleep bruxism than boys. But in conclusion, I think they are common in the Dutch adolescent population. If you look into the literature, there is populations where the prevalence rates are even higher, touching 30% in Brazil. We can discuss about what the cause of this is. Very interesting. And of course, then Daniele again proceeded for a systematic review. He also touched upon this one this morning, so I can be brief again. The results, all papers included were based on proxy report, which means that the parents were asked, does your child grind their teeth? Of course, this is difficult because in some cultures it's normal that parents sleep very near or even in the same room as their kids, whereas in others, like in the Netherlands, we kick them out when they're 6 weeks. And then they are on their own, so what do you know about grinding of your kids? So the prevalence range is quite big here, from not even 4% to over 40%. It's a huge variation. But no gender and age differences within this children's age range. So the high variability is present in children. This is what you should remember. We cannot really say, if you are a kid, this is the prevalence in the population out there. We need better studies there. So let's move on to the etiology. What is causing bruxism? And I know we have touched upon this during the morning several times already, but I'd like to wrap it up a bit and repeat things that we said. I'm not very Italian, as you know, but I could follow the discussion at the end of the morning, which I appreciate a lot. It's good to have discussions. I would like to focus again that the focus on morphology, anatomy and occlusion is really something that we did in the past. We studied a lot, we put a lot of effort in it, but we cannot find any evidence that there is association. I'll show you a small example later on. Nowadays we focus on other things that are more intriguing, I think, because they are also lifestyle attached. So how you live determines a lot if you Bruxism or not. For instance, but also genetics is important. Neurochemicals like dopamine in your brain, which is a neurotransmitter that is important for movements. If there is a balance disturbance, I will show you. Psychosocial factors have been discussed, and this one I like the best, the exogenous factors, medications and smoking. I'll give you some nice examples there. But let's start with the morphological factors. I'll just give you one example. I showed you this morning the review that we did about the Bruxism and the bite, if they're associated. We also did polysonographically controlled study on this. It's the only one so far. And what we did was, it was a Canadian study, despite my name there. 26 occlusal variables were studied on models. 25 spellometric variables were studied on RSPs. And we used polysonographically confirmed Bruxism controls. So we knew from the polysomnography whether or not those people met the criteria for Lavinia, okay, we discussed about it, but they met the criteria for Bruxism or for a control. And we found not a single difference in any of those variables. Usually you will find something by chance, not even that was present. Nothing was there. They were just completely equal. Underlining, again, the message, there is no association between morphology and Bruxism. So let's move on to biological factors. Here I shortened my presentation quite a bit because I like this topic, but I will restrict myself to an old study from also from Canada, where we compared the asymmetries in the brain activity in terms of dopamine activity. Dopamine, as I said earlier, is a neurochemical that is important for motor behavior. If you have balance disturbances between hemispheres, you will develop movement disorders like Parkinson. If you look at the brain maps from Parkinson patients, you see on one side in this striatum, which is this motor core just beneath the cortex, you will see an extreme activity, whereas on the other side hardly any activity is present. Now, I'm not saying that Bruxers resemble Parkinson patients, read my lips well, but there are similarities, and you do see asymmetries in Bruxism patients more than you see asymmetries in controls. If it's zero, it's completely symmetrical, and if it's higher, there's asymmetries. And you see here, the sleep Bruxism patients are a lot higher on average than the control patients. So there is something that makes this group resemble movement disorder patients. Which is normal, it is a movement disorder, so it should also meet some of the biological criteria of movement disorder patients. Genetics, we did a systematic review again, and I thought I skipped this one in my effort to make it shorter, so I don't know what happens now. Or maybe I should just give you the conclusion then. This review, it's a brief review. We assessed all the literature, what that is out there on the genetic effects on Bruxism. We found not so many studies, about 10 or 11 studies by heart. And if you look at those studies, they are very variable in their methods, but they all come to the same conclusion. Yes, there is a genetic component of Bruxism, reaching up to about half of the phenotype, which means that genetics are extremely important. I'm a Bruxer. It's almost 50% chance that my girls are also Bruxers. Poor them, if it's me. Okay, they can blame me for that. Half of the phenotypic variance is due to genetics. This is what you can remember and tell your patient. If they say, I'm a Bruxer and my father is a Bruxer, is this genetic? Yes, most likely it is. At least in part. Now for the psychosocial factors, stress is, I think, something that we all know is very much of importance in the Bruxism etiology, but also personality. You know those types who are really achievers, the type A personalities they call it in the psychological literature. Those are the people who are prone to develop a Bruxism condition. We know this already from very old studies from Finland. And Daniele again studied anxiety, for instance, and he showed that the trait anxiety, so the anxiety that you have as a characteristic of yourself, is determining the amount of muscle activities during the night. Not so much the anxiety that you have at a certain moment. Suppose that you've seen a very nasty horror movie in the evening and you're still anxious about that. That is not determining your bruxism. It is the bruxism that is part of your character that determines if you have more activities, yes or no. This is interesting, I think. This is a study that I still like to see. It's a very old one, but I like it because of, well, the nice findings. Pierce is an American researcher. He studied by means of electromyography sleep bruxers, and he selected 100 of them that were really according to the EMG bruxers. And what he did was to see if it associated with the stress levels. And he found on the group level nothing. Well, then usually you say, okay, then we stop looking. But he was already ahead of his time. Nowadays we always do that. We try to see if on the individual level, not on the group level, but on the individual level, maybe there are some tendencies. And what he found was that in 8 out of his 100 bruxers, he found a very highly significant positive correlation between the amount of bruxism on the one hand and the amount of stress on the other hand. Meaning that the more stressed people were, the more bruxism they showed. But this was only 8 out of 100. And I interpret this that you should apparently be susceptible for the influence of stress on your bruxism behavior. Not everybody is the same. So this underlines the need for personalized dentistry. We were discussing over dinner yesterday that we were entering the area not only of personalized medicine but also personalized dentistry. But this is a very early example of it. Now my favorite topic, the exogenous factors. Why do I like it? Well, because this is lifestyle. Apart from the medication that you sometimes simply need, there is something like illicit drugs. Ecstasy is, of course, in Amsterdam. I read in the newspaper the day that I left for here that they studied all big cities in the world, the water that comes out of the, let's say, the households. And they found in Amsterdam, in Utrecht, Rotterdam, the three of the biggest cities in the Netherlands, they were in the top 5 of the cities in the world where remains of ecstasy can be found. So apparently we are a party country. So this is interesting. But this year, and maybe people know this, if you swallow ecstasy, you start clenching. And this is all related to the fact that this ecstasy is working also on your dopaminergic system. It disturbs the balance. And that makes you clench. People sometimes even bite their own weak soft tissues. They really destroy it when they have swallowed ecstasy pills. And I've seen people, you know what the soother is? Soother is something that the baby puts in their mouth, not with him or herself, with the parents, to stop them crying. They suck on it. Well, sometimes people who go to those parties, they wear on a necklace, they wear a soother, that if they feel that they are starting to clench and they cannot control that, they can put it in their mouth to protect their teeth. It's the truth. It's Amsterdam, okay. Okay, alcohol is the same thing. The more you drink, the more you brux. The same for caffeine. The more caffeine you take, the more you brux. And also, the more you smoke, the more you brux. So everything that we do that we like, and you do not want to be a bruxer, you should stop everything that you like. So this is just a sad message. This is a Finnish study again, and they showed that regular smoking is associated with frequent bruxism, which means that there is a dose-response relationship for smoking. So little smoking, little bruxism. A lot of smoking, a lot of bruxism. Interesting to remember. It's yet another reason to say to your patients you should stop smoking. Yes, you'll have some periodontitis, you'll have some cardiovascular disease, but you also brux a lot from this. And you have to put the pressure on the right spot. Good. So my conclusion, in the past we focused on morphology, and nowadays we more focus on psychosocial, physiologic, biologic, and exogenous factors. Which brings me to my second presentation. I'm now halfway. No, I cut a lot from my second presentation, don't worry. I will talk a little bit about the consequences. I will talk about a little bit about the management, and I will draw some conclusions. And Daniele promised me to cut me short when I'm talking too long again, right? What about the consequences? Well, as I said earlier, bruxism could be considered still as one of the crooks in dentistry because it causes a lot of things, a lot of trouble, like the hypertrophy that we discussed this morning, the tooth wear that we discussed this morning. the failure and fracture of teeth, restorations and even implants that we discussed this morning. Also sensitivity and pain. Also TMJ disc displacements, especially the intermittent blocks. I'll come back to that later. And as you can see here by the arrows, since we discussed this, and here I had no time, and Daniele will discuss it anyway, I take this part out. So I'll focus on the fracture and failure of implants and on my TMJ disc displacements here, before we move on to the treatment. So, also 10 years ago I did the first review on dental implants in patients with bruxing habits. And this was just an old-fashioned type of review, not the very systematic ones that Daniele is now leading in the world of Bruxism. Just an old-fashioned review where you open your drawer, you take out the papers that are relevant and you write a paper on it. Okay, it was back then, it was still acceptable. Interestingly is that the conclusion from this review is more or less the same as the one that came out of a systematic assessment. We concluded there is no proof for the suggestion that bruxism causes an overload of dental implants and of their superstructures. So, basically, it gives an overview of items that the prosthodontist should follow if you want to make sure that you can place implants and make superstructures in your bruxing patients. So stick to the rules, and it doesn't matter if somebody is bruxing. Unless, like in the case of this morning, the bruxism is really severe. Then of course you should be careful. But we concluded at the final end, systematic review is needed. And that is of course the one from Daniele. And I will give you a few details because I like the sophisticated conclusion of this review a lot. And we use it in teaching now every day. This is the search, bruxism and dental implants. Again, English and human, and we complemented it with hand search. We found 77 articles, and at the end, 21 were included in the systematic assessment. Now, of those 21, 14 were dealing with so-called biological complications. Biological complication means that something in the attachment of the implant in the system of the patient is failing, like the osseointegration is failing. That is a biological complication. And the other papers, the remaining 7, they were dealing with mechanical complications, like fractures of the implant itself or of the superstructure, loosening of screws, all those kinds of things. Now what about the evidence for bruxism causing those complications? Well, for the biological complications, and this might be a surprise, no association with bruxism was found in 6 and an unclear association in 8 of the papers. Which means, if you read this well, that there is no proof that bruxism causes biological complications. So loss of osseointegration cannot be blamed on bruxism. Like loss of periodontal attachment, as we discussed this morning, cannot be blamed on bruxism. It's the same thing. There is a parallel. But the mechanical complications, on the other hand, the 7 other papers, 4 out of 7 showed positive association. Very clear positive association. So, 2 conclusions. The first I already gave you. It is unlikely, this is again one of those, let's say, formal systematic review type of conclusions. It is unlikely that bruxism causes biological complications with implants. And there are indications that bruxism causes mechanical complications with implants. So remember, not the biology, but the mechanical parts, they fail due to bruxism. Anybody knows what intermittent blocks are in the joint? We move on to the next topic. We have had the implants, now we move to the TMJ problems. You have this disc displacement in the temporomandibular joint, that is a clicking joint, if it reduces. And you also have the situation where you have the so-called closed lock, where the disc stays in front anterior of the condyle, and whatever you try, it stays there and you have a limited mouth opening. But in between, there's the intermittent block. And that means that those patients sometimes click and sometimes lock. It's a very, very annoying type of problem because it's not predictable. Suppose that we have a nice dinner tonight and I'm one of those patients and I want to open my mouth wide for a nice piece of I don't know what, some fish or something.
Pizza.
Then pizza, very good. I love pizza. Then suddenly there's this lock and I cannot do that anymore. That is very annoying. So I rather have a predictable situation. So those patients, they are a problem. So we wanted to study what the association between intermittent blocks and bruxism is, because we had indications that there might be an association. So the first question is, what is the effect of loading So read Bruxism here on the occurrence of an anterior disc displacement with intermittent blocking. It's going to be an experimental study, and you can debate with me whether or not we did something ethical. Our medical ethics committee approved it, okay? So, but we can still discuss about it. What we did was the following. We used Elma. Any Greek people in the audience? Elma is the toughest chewing gum in the world. It comes from the Isle of Chios, our Greek colleagues always say, and there's this mastiche tree, and from that they take the gum, and this is something that really is, it's a jawbreaker almost. It's really tough. Now, this is the gum that we used as an experimental loading of the jaw. So we are not going to ask people to brux, but we were loading it with tough chewing gum. We selected 15 regular clicking patients, so ADD plus R means anterior disc displacement with reduction, so the clicking joint. And the ADD plus minus R is this intermittent blocking patient. Also 15 of them we selected. And we made movement recordings of the jaw. So what you see here, you look at the side of the patient in this direction. This is the closed mouth situation with the condyle seated in the fossa. You can all see that in front of you. So then we open the mouth, that's the red tracing. You open the mouth and you see here all kinds of asterisks. This is the moment that we have the reduction. So the disc that is in closed position anterior of the condyle pops back on the condyle, and then the opening can just go until the end. And then there's closing. All the time the disc is on the condyle, the disc is on the condyle. And here, again, all the asterisks indicate that the disc is going to the front again. Okay, so in the closed mouth position, it's again on the front. And what we did, very simple, 2 lines, the A and the B line, and we made this calculation, A by B times 100%, and that we called the moment of this reduction. It's very simple mathematics. So what we did, 60 minutes of intensive gum chewing, that was our loading, experimental loading, 7 pieces of Elma. And Elma is already very tough with 1 piece, so you can imagine this was hard work. Is it ethical? Our committee thought yes. And we have a very tough committee, so, but nevertheless, if you do not like this research, you can just skip it and do something else now. We measured before the chewing, we measured immediately after the chewing, what the moment of disc reduction was, 20 minutes later, and also after 72 hours. Because we wanted to everything that we caused to go away again, of course. Now, in the first group, we had 2 groups, remember, the clicking joint and the intermittent blocking. In the first group, nothing happened to the MDR. So the moment of disc reduction remained the same, regardless of all the chewing on the big bolus of tough chewing gum. Nothing happened. For the intermittent blocking, it was different. We found a significant increase in the MDR, so the click was happening a lot later in time. In 2 out of 15, it was delayed. In 4 out of 15, there was no reduction at all, so we caused, temporarily, I must stress, a closed lock in those patients by the chewing gum. Here you see an example. Here you see an example of, this is the time, A, B, C, and D are the moments of, let's say, baseline, immediately after chewing, 20 minutes later, and after 72 hours. And here you see immediately after the chewing, you see that the MDR has increased. And here you see also there was an increase, and only at 72 hours, so it stayed a problem here, but after 72 hours they were back at baseline. So those were the images that we could create based on our measurements. Some other examples of temporary loss. And you see that some patients, they left our office, like in this one here, with still a worse situation, but after 72 hours the situation was always back to the baseline. The bottom line of this research is that if you load the temporomandibular joint with an intermittent block, and it can also be Bruxism in my mind, and I will show you evidence that Bruxism indeed is associated here, that you can cause an intermittent block to become a closed block, or a tendency towards becoming a closed block. Okay, so it is affecting the TMJ biomechanics. So, loading does not influence disc reduction in ADD plus R, so the regular clicking joint, but it may delay or hamper the reduction in the intermittent clicks. Clinical implication, this is important of course for the clinicians amongst you, that patients with intermittent blocking should be informed about the possible relationship between the loading and permanent blocking. And we all have those, also the gum chewers in our clinics. Gum chewing is okay, I have no judgment there. But if you have a problem like that, you should advise your patient not to diminish the gum chewing, but to stop the gum chewing. Just cold turkey, stop, give it to me, and you never chew gum again, because it will cause your jaw to become in a permanently locked state. Now we did another study that is confirming what we found in the experiments. This is an epidemiological study. And we looked at risk factors for ADD with reduction, and again, this intermittent locking, again amongst adolescents. We also like adolescents, like you love children in Brazil. Huh? So this is the paper. It's published already about 5 years ago. We studied 12 to 16-year-old adolescents in a number of reasonable size sample, 260 adolescents. And this is just to show you the age distribution and the gender distribution. You see for the age groups 12 to 16, that's about 50 per group, and males and females are, let's say, at the bottom line is that they're almost equally distributed. Now, what did we do? We examined them clinically to see if they would have an ADD plus R. We inspected them in the mouth to see if there were wear facets that could indicate grinding. We were looking at nail biting, for instance, to see if the habit of nail biting is present and other bear function habits. And we also asked them for intermittent locking. Somehow in the clinic, to see actually an intermittent locking happening is very rare in my opinion. I hardly have seen this, maybe a few times in my career so far. But of course it can happen, but most of the time you need to rely on what the patients tell you. Does your jaw sometimes lock so that you cannot open wider, despite the fact that you know that you could? So we did again some nice statistics, univariate logistic regression followed by stepwise backward multiple regression. And believe me, this is the proper method. And if you have questions about the statistics, you can ask Peter, he knows everything about it. So. This is the result. It's not possible to read it. It's also not important. I will just tell you what you could read if you would have magnifying glasses with you. This is about the regular clicking joint, so the ADD plus R, and you can see that only age is associated with it in a positive way, which means that if the kid grows older, the likelihood that they will have an ADD plus R, so the clicking joint, is higher. That's the only thing that we found for this group. And it's also, we already found this in the past. If you focus on this part here, from 12 to 16 years, you see for females, which is the light bar, and the males, which is the dark bar, that they are going up in time in another study from our group as well. So this confirms what we found in the past. But now, the intermittent lock, because that is the most interesting thing. What are the factors associated with intermittent locking? Well, it's not age, it is not gender, it's basically only one thing. And you can guess what it is, because this is a Bruxism conference. It is diurnal clenching, it says here, so awake clenching. So the only thing that was determining those kids to report sometimes to have those intermittent lockings was awake clenching. I think it's intriguing, especially because it confirms what we found in our experimental study. So what did we conclude? Well, the risk indicator for ADDR in adolescence is the increasing age. So if you want to prevent that, kids should not grow older, which is not a good idea. The mechanism could be that there are, during this time from 12 to 16, that there are changes in the intra-articular spatial relations. It's still a growing phase, so that might be a mechanical explanation. And for the intermittent locking, it was awake clenching. That was the only risk factor or risk indicator that we found. Mechanism, well, maybe the disc reduction is hampered due to the loading. It could also be very simply something mechanical again. That the loading hampers the disc from reducing back onto the condyle. Enough about the consequences. I think the pain and the TMD will be dealt with you again later on. So I skipped a lot of the slides now, about an hour. Let's move on to the management. And the first slide is maybe the most important one. I already said this morning that prevention of bruxism is not something that I really strive for. And to be even more clear, management, so treatment of bruxism, when I teach to students, I say, you do not treat bruxism. And then I'm quiet and I'm silent and I wait for reactions. And sometimes students react if they're not asleep. They say, why? it's damaging your teeth and you will have pain and they are angry with me. And I say, well, maybe if you hear about the possible good outcomes of bruxism, then you will understand. So it's only indicated if there are any of the possible consequences, and then in a severe way. So severe attrition, severe pain, then you try to diminish the bruxism activity, because that hampers daily life. If it's all mild and everything is under control, stay out. That's the message. There's 2 reviews that I would like to discuss with you. 2008 I did a not so very systematic review, but still systematic. We did not do a quality assessment, and of course then Daniele did a better job, and we redid the review basically on the years that were between 2008 and 2015. So the first one was called Principles for the Management of Bruxism. This is again one of those search strategies, and believe me, if you do a search like this, you will find everything that remotely is related to the management of bruxism. Okay? This is if you ever want to do something similar yourself, type those words into the search box of PubMed and you'll find everything. We found 177 papers, of which we finally included 135. It's again not a lot of papers. I mean, people talk a lot about treatment of bruxism, but if it comes to studying it in a way that it ends up in PubMed, which hosts scientific literature, then it's not a lot. I mean, we searched for, there was no time limit, so we went back to the 60s, and then only 177 studies. Anyway, this is a graph showing the enormous variation in study designs. And of course you're aware that if you study the efficacy of certain treatment modalities, you need to follow the randomized clinical trial principles. But only this part here, this pie, here 13% is clinical trials. All the others are different things, like comparative studies, case reports. You see an enormous amount of case reports, letters to the editor which have no evidence level at all, reviews quite a bit, and summaries, that's opinions of authors and stuff. It's just an enormously small part. This is also interesting. It's a time trend of study types or focus points for the study. And I make a distinction in this part of my presentation between occlusal treatments, in the broadest sense, behavioral treatments, so let's say psychosocial treatments, and pharmacological treatments. And those categories, you can see that the focus on occlusion has been, let's say, more or less stable. The white bars, with the exception of maybe this one that is a bit higher, but it's always been in the attention of us dentists. Whereas somehow, to my surprise, the behavioral studies are going down in attention over time. But then not so much to my surprise, and I'll explain to you later why. There's an increase in pharmacological studies. So the effects of pharmacology is, of course, for you, now that you've heard that it's central, it's logical that you do the treatment also with centrally acting medication. I'll give you some examples later. So I have 3 categories: occlusal therapies, we have the behavioral therapies, and we have the pills, the pharmacological therapies. And they are, and that's why I show this, attached to the occlusal etiology that I already discussed that we do not see anymore, the psychological, it's not so kind, the psychological category, and the central category, the brain category. I can be a nice person, but sometimes I'm a bit rude, I think. Anyway. So 1, 2, and 3. So let's start with 1, the occlusal approach. It's the true occlusal interventions, meaning that we really intervene with the occlusion. And the second is occlusal appliances, splints, etc. So the true occlusal interventions, they include occlusal calibration, orthodontics, etc. The studies that are there, they have a low level of evidence. Too low to pass for the quality exam. So they would not have been included in the review if you would have done. We didn't, but if we would have done quality assessment for every paper, they would have been kicked out. Interestingly is the protagonists, they claim success based on their own clinical experience, whereas the opponents, they cite frequently a paper from Green. Charles Green is an orthodontist, by the way, from the United States, and he writes that occlusal adjustments further mutilate the dentition beyond what bruxism itself has done. It's a very nice quote, I think. I I mean, you cause tooth wear by bruxism, and then you're going to do even a better job by grinding the teeth. Stay out is the message. So there's no support for true occlusal interventions in the treatment of bruxism. This is what you should try to remember. And further research, I think, given the fact that we now know that there is no association, it seems redundant to put more energy into this category. Occlusal appliances, this is interesting because this is, I think, the most frequently used treatment modality for bruxism. And of course we have the soft splints and the hard splints, and they have various designs, full coverage, partial coverage. And there are several RCTs and a systematic review available at the time that we did this review. So let's start with the randomized clinical trials. Dubé, again in Montreal, and Van der Zaat in Amsterdam. They studied the efficacy of hard occlusal splints, like this one here, as compared to a palatal control device, a placebo splint. Placebo splint is an interesting phenomenon. We made a very thin, very thin palatal splint that did not cover the occlusal surfaces at all, but just a piece of plastic to the palate. And the patients obtained the same instructions as the patients wearing the full coverage occlusal splints. So they also had to take it out and put it in, they had to clean it, they have to wear it, they have to bring it to the dentist for their checkups. It's the same thing, but just it didn't do anything. That's the placebo splint. What did Dubé found? Dubé studied the effects of the splint on, over a period of 2 weeks. And she found that both devices, the normal splint and the palatal splint, they both, interestingly, both of them reduced bruxism activity. So not only the one that covered the occlusion, but also the one that did not intervene with occlusion at all reduced the bruxism activity. Van der Zaat, he did not use a 2-week interval, but a 4-week interval, and we found that neither of them was working against bruxism. So not the full coverage splint didn't do anything, but also not the placebo splint. Now, this is puzzling, of course. What Van der Zaat did was going into the personalized dentistry, into the individual patients, and we found large differences. Some patients were actually reacting on the splint in a positive way, some were actually reacting in a negative way, that they had a worsened bruxism situation when they were wearing a splint. So a lot of variation, but the bottom line is that at the group level, nothing happened. And now there was, happily, we always have the Japanese, which is good. And in Japan, they did just a little bit later, they thought, well, we are going to do multiple measurements over a 6-week period, because Dubé said, yes, it works, and Van der Zaat says, no, it doesn't work, so let's measure over 6 weeks, multiple time points. And what they found was that there is a transient effect of the oral appliances over a 6-week period, meaning that in the beginning, everything works, and at the end, nothing works anymore. So apparently, we in Amsterdam, we were too late with our 4 weeks, and maybe Dubé was, depending on what you want to find, a bit too early or just on time to see effects of the splints. It's a very interesting way of combining RCTs. So I'm grateful to the Japanese that they did this extra study to help us interpreting our own findings. Now interestingly, you know that there is this mandibular advancement device that can be used against sleep apnea. There's just an example here of a monoblock with a screw mechanism. Landry, again in Montreal, they studied the effects of MAD on sleep apnea, not alone, but also on bruxism activity. Now, interestingly, they found that, of course, the MAD was reducing the sleep apnea problem, but also the bruxism problem. And they have various possible explanations. One of them was that they were using not one of those very nicely, individualizedly made appliances, but they made something pre-cooked almost, so that was maybe hurting a little bit in the mouth. And when you have pain in your mouth, we now know, and Daniel will tell about this more, that you reduce the muscle activity just by the fact that you have pain as a protective mechanism, but that is for later in the afternoon. But maybe it's also caused by the fact that sleep apnea and sleep bruxism are also associated conditions. And if you reduce one, it will have, by that mechanism, effects on the other. But one way or the other, the MAD works in sleep bruxism. It's interesting. We made it for something else, and it works for another condition. So let's continue with the oral appliances. There was back then this systematic review, Cochrane review and Macado. I think it's Brazilian, I'm not sure, or Portuguese, or I'm not sure. Occlusal splints for treating sleep bruxism. They identified 32 potentially relevant RCTs. 5 were included, amongst others Dubé, Van der Zaag and Landry. They were there, so that is good. And their conclusion was, again, in one of those formal systematic review formulations, that there is no sufficient evidence to state that an occlusal splint is effective for the treatment of sleep bruxism. Does this mean that we should get rid of the splint? This is then, of course, the big question that you might have. Well, maybe it is prudent to limit the use of oral splints in the management of bruxism to prevention of dental damage. I am perfectly happy if you make a splint in a bruxism patient and you tell your patient, well, if it's going to work for your bruxism, I don't know. The literature is very vague about that. But at least it will protect your teeth from further damage. And I'm showing this elephant. It's in the city near my hometown. It's Sammy. Sammy is a big bull. And the big bull needs to produce a lot of offspring, as they usually should. And then they have to look sharp. And then those teeth here, they need to be in good condition. And this bull is sleeping on his side on the concrete floor. And when it moves his head like this, the teeth will wear down. So what did the people from the zoo do? They made those rings around the teeth. So basically this is a splint, protective splint for elephants. Okay, I like it. It's up to you if you like it. But future research, I think, should focus on differences in efficacy amongst individual patients. We are intrigued by the fact that in some patients it works and in others it doesn't. Why? How come? We need to know this for the future so that we can predict if we make a split it will actually work or not. And this is a big, big challenge for all of us for the future. For the behavioral approaches, we have the biofeedback approaches for awake bruxism and sleep bruxism, and also, let's say, other behavioral approaches. Biofeedback, they use a paradigm. Always treatments, they live in a certain paradigm. And bruxers can only learn their behavior when stimuli make them aware of their adverse jaw muscle activities. This is the paradigm. It's a belief for people who use these kinds of treatments. And the stimuli then needs to be contingent, like related to adverse motor behavior. And you'll hear a presentation of Eduardo, I think later today, about the contingent stimulation device. So for awake bruxism, the jaw muscle control can be done by auditory stimuli, like a beep when you do something with your muscles, or something visual from surface EMG. In general, there is low level of evidence, but maybe we have new information later coming up. Back then, there were only 2 RCTs with conflicting outcomes. But if you go to sleep bruxism, you can use also auditory, but you will wake up. If there's a large beep, you will wake up many times, and this is not very good for your sleep quality. You will have excessive fatigue during the day, and that might lead to car accidents and you die from it, so then the treatment is worse than the condition that you suffer from. Electrical could be an option, vibratory and even taste stimuli. I read it was a case report, but it's interesting. It was a splint in which there were capsules filled with some kind of a very nasty tasting mustard. And when people were increasing the force too much on this splint, the capsules, they opened up and you had your mouth full with this mustard and you had to wake up, go to the bathroom, clean your mouth and go back to sleep again. And I guess that they did not put any mustard again in their splints. It was interesting, but I think they didn't find any widespread usage. Stimuli, you must be aware, as I said, that they can cause arousals and awakenings. We should always check for that we should prevent excessive daytime sleepiness, and there is a general low level of evidence. Only 1 RCT back then with those kinds of devices, but they seem to have a modest effect, but there were no long-term results. And if you want to say that something is efficacious, you also have to know that it is safe, so no excessive daytime sleepiness, and that it works on long term. That it works on short term is not good enough. So if you do a clinical trial or you read it and it's only short-term outcome, it's the beginning, it's nice. But you need to have safety information, you need to have information about the long term. Very important. Other behavioral approaches is a lot, like autosuggestion, hypnosis, relaxation. Everything is written in the literature. But I would like to spend a few words on sleep hygiene. You all know oral hygiene, but sleep hygiene is maybe even more important than oral hygiene. What does it mean? Well, it is kinds of, let's say, rules how to live to have a good sleep quality. So if you follow the rules of good living, you will have a better sleep quality. and it's, according to Morin, it leads to a decrease in sleep bruxism activities. And how come? Well, maybe because if you have a good sleep quality, you go deeper into your sleep. You go to the deeper sleep stages. And we know that bruxism is mainly in the lighter sleep stages, stages 1 and 2, and not in stage 3, the deep sleep stage. That means that if you have more time that you spend in deep sleep, so better sleep quality, there is simply less time available to brux. And that alone can reduce your total amount of bruxism during the night. So what do you do? Well, again, we are going to battle against caffeine, nicotine, alcohol. Everything is not good. So if you have a bruxer, or you are yourself a bruxer, then you should live like a monk. Okay? Reduce everything that is pleasant, and no physical activities prior to sleep is also one of those. It's a very nasty type of living that you will have. But the aims are, as I said, go more into deep sleep stages. It occurs more in light sleep stages, and bruxism is likely to decrease. This is the message that I would like you to remember. Then, of course, we studied this, if it actually is provable that it works like that. We did this. Valiente Lopez is a former student of me, and unfortunately, we did not find any difference between sleep hygiene instructions and counseling as compared to counseling only. So that means that in this study, we could not prove the effects of sleep hygiene. The big question is then, does that mean that it's not important anymore? You can drink and smoke and everything. I think that is unwise. There are other studies for other conditions in which the benefits of a good sleep hygiene have been proven. So please follow those rules if you have a problem, and maybe we should simply do a better job in our research. We could improve it for the quality of it. I think it's a good study, but it's not excellent. There are some issues to it. So, as yet, the value of behavioral approaches in the management of bruxism is questionable, and there is no sound scientific evidence for their use. We need more research. It's an open door, we always say this, but specifically in the treatment of bruxism, we really need more research. So let's move on to the pills. The subject, as I showed you on one of the earlier slides, is increasingly studied. Many case reports and only some randomized clinical trials are available. And there was an extensive review back then from Efraim Binocur from Tel Aviv. I already mentioned his name earlier. He was one of the co-supervisors of Daniele's thesis. A nice little chap. Not Daniele, he's tall. Pharmacological approaches. I just give you the results of some of the pills. Saletu found that there was an effect of clonazepam, which is a benzodiazepine. It's something that makes you calm. At short term, but I already said about short term, that's not good enough. What about the long term, and what about the safety issue, like the risk of addiction to those kinds of medications? That needs to be studied. A longer time ago, Edsel studied L-tryptophan, which is a serotonin precursor, which affects the dopamine system. So that could be promising. But it turned out not to have any effect on bruxism. Well, we did a study ourselves with L-dopa, which is a dopamine precursor only at the short term. L-dopa worked at the short term. It gave a reduction by heart of 31.4%, which is a modest attenuating effect. But we did not study the long term, and we did not go into side effects too much. So also, we, back then, 20 years ago, I dare to say, we did not do the full thing yet. Lavigne, a little bit later, from the same group, bromocriptine is also an anti-Parkinson medication. We found no effect of this specific one here. And there was two groups who studied amitriptyline, which is a tricyclic antidepressant medication, a very classical one, and no effects at low doses. And we have been studying this at ACTA as well, at even lower doses, because sometimes the doses should not be higher, but lower to be effective. But we didn't find anything either. We still need to publish that one. No time. Nelly Wing from Montreal, she studied propranolol, didn't work, but there is a promising one. Clonidine, which is a selective alpha-2 agonist. There was a very positive attenuating effect on sleep bruxism. But also, she indicated that further safety assessment is required, and I think that it's ongoing right now, because patients, about 1/5 of the patients, they reported a severe hypotension in the morning. You know that if you wake up, you sit upright, that you are almost fainting. This is what I mean. This is the big problem. Actually, this is also a side effect of L-DOPA. Where is it? Here, I should have made it yellow. L-DOPA is also causing those hypotensions in the morning. So the conclusion...
Any studies on melatonin?
No, melatonin they're not there. Not in a way that it was controlled by means of polysomnography. Maybe some cases, but they were not there. Some pharmacological approaches for sleep bruxism seem promising, especially the latter one, the clonidine. But we need further efficacy and safety assessment before we can make any recommendations. I think that we should, as dentists, try to stay out a bit of the pill pot, so to say, and have the help of medical doctors to prescribe those drugs for us, so that they can not only monitor the effects, but especially also the side effects. If I prescribe it, and I'm entitled to do it, I'm also responsible for the side effects, and I do not know how to handle in all cases of side effects, and medical doctors do. So there we need to work together, multidisciplinary. So the overall conclusions of 2008 were that in the vast majority of the papers that we included, they were inconclusive. Only 13% were RCTs. There is a large need of well-designed studies, and I think we all, as clinicians, we should be aware of the paucity of evidence regarding bruxism treatment. We are far from there, knowing how to treat our patients. Now the question is, what happened after 2008? Now I move on to the study from Daniele again, a real systematic review, and I'll be a bit briefer on this one. We did a very official search, and we came up with almost 1,500 papers at first. And then finally, and that is always fun, you're always happy that you do not have to read all 1,494 papers in full text. We ended up with 14 to be read in detail, and also 12 that we had to exclude. So 26 we had to read in full. That is doable for a human being. 1,500 papers reading is not doable. Unless you're Daniele, you can do it, I think, but I can't. It's too much for me. So, about those 14 papers. 7 of them were dealing with occlusal treatments. It's again, there are still studies on occlusion. Almost all were dealing with splints, and all were somehow effective this time, including the MAD, the mandibular advancement device, that has been developed, as I said earlier, for sleep apnea treatment, and not specifically for sleep bruxism treatment. About behavioral treatments, 3 studies, biofeedback and cognitive behavioral therapy. They are not effective, but contingent electrical stimulation yielded promising results, Eduardo. That's one of your studies, I think. And we'll be hearing a little bit more about that later. Pharmacological treatment, botulinum toxin has been studied and is being studied increasingly. Clonazepam and clonidine, they seem effective, but still we need more research on that, especially on the side effects. So what is the overall conclusion of the 2015 review? Well, that there is not enough evidence to define a standard of reference approach for sleep bruxism treatment, except for the use of oral appliances. And as I said earlier, even if you do not believe that these are effective in your patients, it can still be used for the prevention of further damage to the teeth. So that is not a problem. Although at the end of my presentation I will give you some cautionary remarks on the uses of splints. We need more research. Okay, there we go. So what is then the recommendation? Do I leave you empty-handed here? No. I will give you some clinical recommendations. And bruxism, in absence of definitive evidence, can best be treated with the famous triple P approach. Okay, this is the approach. It's very simple. What is triple P all about? It's about plates, about pep talk, and about pills. Plates, of course, is splints. Pep talk is counseling and sleep hygiene and stuff. And pills is, well, what it says, medication, drugs, etc. About the plates, if you make a splint, make sure that it is a full coverage splint. Try to stay away from those partial coverage splints because they destroy the bite. And even though that doesn't cause any bruxism or TMD, it is very uncomfortable for the patient to have a bite like that. So stay out of that, use full coverage, and use hard ones. We know from the soft splints that they are causing increase in bruxism activity in some cases. So stay out of the soft splints. You can imagine, it feels nice. Soft splint is like a gift. It's chewing gum. We all like chewing gum, so you chew a bit on your splint. It's making the thing worse. So hard splints, that's a punishment, that's good. It's more protecting the dentition and it's diminishing the bruxism behavior, but this is about plates. Be aware that your patients sometimes go to the internet for a solution. And they order their splints from the internet, or they go to the pharmacy around the corner, and then there is this shelf with all kinds of splints that they can make themselves. Be aware that if you see strange things changing in the bite of your patient, it's not always pathology. It can also be the fact that they have a partial coverage over-the-counter splint in their mouth. So be careful, ask questions, talk to your patients, listen to your patients, and try to discover that they are using this. If they do, explain to them that this is not a good idea. And tell them that they can buy a very nice, very expensive splint from you. Now that is of course the big problem. Our splints are expensive and the over-the-counter stuff is cheap. But as soon as they realize that they do damage to themselves, I think that they are willing to have a regular splint from you. Now I'm almost at the end, Daniele. My warning for occlusal splints. Occlusal splints are fine, but if you have a sleep apnea problem that has not been discovered yet, and you make a splint, you can worsen the sleep apnea by wearing a regular splint. And I show you two studies now that will prove to you that this is actually the case. The first one is also from a former student of our department, Maria Nicolopoulou. She's now living in a very nice island of Crete. I'm very jealous. It's never raining in Crete, I think. I'm not saying that here it's never raining. So the effect of raising the bite without mandibular protrusion on obstructive sleep apnea. It's all based on an observation from Gagnon, again from the GSID group, that occlusal splints in OSA may be associated with a risk of aggravation of the respiratory disturbance. This was an open label pilot study, meaning that there's all kinds of possibilities that bias will influence the outcome. So this cries to be done again, to be redone. So what did Nicolopoulou do? Well, we aim to test whether raising the bite, so let's say acting as if there is an occlusal splint in the mouth without protrusion, so just in the centriculation, in OSA patients would be associated with increased AHI. And we did a clinical trial. It was not controlled or randomized. It is a clinical trial, but it's not the top of the bill yet. That's the next study that I'll present to you. We had 18 OSA patients, 13 of them being men, and they had the average age of the OSA patient that it starts around middle age, my age, okay. The MAD that we made was set in 0% protrusion. That means that it is basically in centriculation. It resembles in that way an occlusal stabilization appliance. We did a baseline polysomnographic recording. We made the patient wear the MAD in the 0% position for 4 weeks, every night. And then we had them back in the sleep lab. These were sleep laboratory recordings with the MAD inside you. And we used the AHI, apnea-hypopnea index. That's a measure for the severity of sleep apnea as the primary outcome measure of this study. And this is the outcome. You see here on the y-axis the AHI, so the severity of the sleep apnea. This is the baseline measurement, so before the MAD was placed, and this is with the MAD in the mouth. And you see it's going up and down. It's really a mess. This is not a very, let's say, smooth image that you see here. So, and then of course you're not surprised when you do statistical tests that you will not find any statistical significance. But again, we go to the personalized dentistry era, so we look now at the individual level. And then if you count the lines that go up from baseline to device, half of them show an aggravation. Okay? That is, but sometimes a lot and sometimes just a little bit that they go up. So what we did was to see if the raise in AHI was clinically significant. And for that you can use the so-called smallest detectable difference. It's a mathematical trick almost to say that in the individual level a certain change can be considered as meaningful. And for that the difference should be 12.8. This was studied by another colleague in Amsterdam, by Gisèle Arab, and she found this number. So about 13, if you have a difference between moment A and moment B of 13 or more, it's clinically relevant. And then in 2 out of 9, we had this clinically relevant outcome. So what is then the conclusion if you see this? Well, that an increased jaw gape without mandibular protrusion might be associated with the risk of aggravation of OSA in some, not in all patients. In half of the patients we see the increase, and in 2 it was really clinically meaningful. But still, it's there. So the observation of Gagnon was actually confirmed. But randomized clinical trials were needed, and that's what we proceeded at. She was supposed to do 1 study, but she did 2. I always like that. Now she did a true RCT, a randomized clinical trial with true stabilization splints, not these modified MADs anymore. And we were looking if this could cause a worsening of the sleep apnea in a randomized controlled trial. So the aim was to assess the influence, and this is how the study looked like. We had 10 OSA patients, again with a mean age that resembles the previous study. We made an occlusal stabilization splint in the upper jaw, as we always make for our TMD patients and our Bruxism patients. We made 3 ESG recordings in a row on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday with the splint in the without the splint in the mouth, and another 3 recordings a week later, again on the same weekdays with the splint in the mouth. And we did this in a crossover design, meaning that half of the patients had the first week without the splint, and the other half of the patients had the second week without the splint. So we crossed this over. This is the way that you should design those RCTs. Well, this is just a photograph of the type of splint, and here you see the outcome. It's not spectacular, I must admit, but all those lines go up, all of them. Now we are bias-free because it's an RCT. We do not have these clinically meaningful differences anymore, but still now at the group level, we have a significant difference between the 2 situations. So that means that you can conclude that the use of an occlusal stabilization splint is associated with the risk of aggravation of OSA. And I think that is then the most important message of this part of our presentation, that we as dentists, we should all be aware of a possible OSA in our patient's history. So ask questions that could point into the direction of sleep apnea, like being fatigued during the day, falling asleep during the day, during a lecture for instance, falling asleep behind a wheel, having a headache in the morning, have a partner complaining about snoring. All those kinds of things, they are important to realize that it might indicate an OSA. So that was the second P. I now go to the first P, we go to the second P, that's the counseling, and this is going to be quick. It is not proven that there is a true effect from those kinds of approaches, like the sleep hygiene that I showed to you, but it can be applied safely. So there's no harm from this. So you can do it. And then finally the pills. Of course, this is the pharmacological interventions with centrally acting drugs. That's where the etiology is in the brain. That's where the medication should work, not in the periphery. You should confine it to short periods, to severe cases, and only when your counseling and your plates, your splints do not work. It's not the first choice. It's the second choice that you go for in your patient population. And I think then that the triple P approach, that it reflects the current insights to the etiology. As I said, it's centrally, it's not peripherally regulated, and it also underlines the need for a multidisciplinary approach. We cannot do it alone as dentists, impossible. So at ACTA we have a team with physiotherapists, a psychologist, we have easy access to medical specialists, we have an oral surgeon in the team, and we have a lot of dentists, of course. But we are a multidisciplinary team. All those people need to work together to manage those Bruxism patients who need management. And I underline that not all our Bruxism patients need to be treated. So my conclusions, I think that you can agree with me that Bruxism is a common condition. It's not rare. Usually the diagnosis and the treatment, as long as it's not pharmacological, can be performed by dentists. But sometimes, and then I'm talking about severe cases, the diagnosis needs to be established with instruments like ESG, EMG, whatever. The possible differential diagnosis sometimes need to be excluded. If you suspect dystonia, for instance, or dyskinesia, then you need to have the help from other disciplines. And the pharmacological treatment, when that needs to be performed, then a multidisciplinary approach is needed. Well, those are the people, it's a selection of people that I work with. It's people from all over the world. Here you see the guy that you know, I think, quite well, Daniele Manfredini. And this is, again, ACTA, and I would like to point this in the evening. And you see here, it's a dark corner. That's my office, I'm not there. But I say thank you for your kind attention from my office anyway. Thank you.
presentation, as usual, having that about it. Just a couple of questions to start the discussion before the short communication. First question is, of course, I know the answer, as you did, Morik, but are there any studies in the literature showing when we should treat bruxism and not only with what approach?
It's a very important question. Actually, no. I think there's a big need for studies like that. Every individual patient will show to you as a dentist a different image. They will be psychologically normal, they will have psychological problems, they will be medically compromised, they might be medically healthy, they might be vulnerable for overloading, or they might be so strong that overloading will not cause anything. So very much determined by the individual situation will determine whether or not we should treat bruxism. Okay? And now I realize, now that you asked this, and maybe this was your question, I promised the friends that bruxism can also be your friend to outline that. I think I skipped this slide when I was doing my shortening, so I can just briefly summarize the friendship part of bruxism, especially for Matthias. You should write it down in the journal, right? First of all, it's the sleep apnea thing, as it was already mentioned by Daniele and also in the discussion at the end of the morning, that if you have sleep bruxism, that it might strengthen the upper airway, thereby preventing collapse of the upper airway, and that might be beneficial for sleep apnea. That is good. Second, we already discussed about the cognition part. Masticatory activity is good for your brain, as is walking around, very good for your brain. Sitting on your cycle during the Giro d'Italia is good for your brain. I know you love cycling. All those kinds of activities, they're good for your brain. But chewing, especially older people, and over the lunch break we discussed this again, sometimes it's the only thing that people can still do, they can eat. Well, give them good food for the cognition. That's number 2. Number 3, people can have problems with the humidity of the mouth. And maybe, in some cases, bruxism is beneficial to stimulate the parotid gland, for instance, so that the saliva flow will not be interrupted too much, and they will not suffer from a dry mouth that much. That's number 3. And number 4 is very speculative. I realize that, and maybe it's not true. But I think that if you have enough muscle activity in your jaw, it might prevent, if people who grow a little bit older, too much of the osteoporosis problem, because the muscles are still pulling on the bones. It might strengthen your bones. I need to study this, but I love to say it, and so it's at least 4 good reasons that we need to be careful to treat every bruxer.
That's nice. Any question about this topic? Otherwise, I will go to my second question, which is on your sleep apnea issue.
What is your understanding of the effect of plates on the worsening? On the worsening of osmosis? How can you explain that effect of worsening?
Yeah. I can explain it the easiest way, in a mechanical way. If you make your occlusal stabilization appliance, you make it in centriculation. If you do that and you open up the mouth a little bit, a few millimeters with your splint, the mandible rotates backwards, and it reduces the space in the throat for the air. So it's a simple mechanical explanation. Maybe there are other explanations, but this one is the easiest.
Thank you.
Let me just say, meanwhile, that this one was exactly my second question. I was there sitting with Luca, and we were just talking about that. Okay, mechanical explanations sometimes are the most logical things to
in the different types of mandibular advanced device. So thinking about mechanically, because there are 2 main types, the one that are fixed and the one that they are able to move. So I guess from the mechanical explanation, the movable ones will be the ones that prevent worsening of the process.
Well, maybe just the inverse. I think that the fixed ones that do not allow any movement of the mandible, and if you put them in a proper position, will prevent the upper airway from collapsing. If you make the rotation still possible, you can still open your mouth, for instance. You can still rotate back your mandible and you might still worsen the problem. So I really advertise to our OSA patients the fixed one and not the one that gives you too much freedom. There can be a little bit of freedom, of course, but it should not allow you too much of a freedom. Peter looks at me, he's more specialized in this, what I... Okay.
Sorry, can you suggest us that the Bruxism could stop alone if you, even if you do nothing, or can it start in sometimes, I don't know where, and so on? Do you have some idea related instead of the literature, say, your experience?
Actually, you were asking about the fluctuating nature of Bruxism, whether it can come and go spontaneously, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. But we have studied the fluctuation of sleep Bruxism, and we know it fluctuates a lot. So if you are supposedly stable, in a stable phase of your life, the same season,